Welcome to Petrichor on the Rocks. I'm Mason. I don't worship anything. I hear this phrase constantly from modern people. The problem is, everyone worships something. Even if you don't worship Jesus Christ, the pagan gods are still alive and well today. Sure, they've been revealed for the demons that they really were the whole time, but even so, they still hold great power within our society, and chances are you worship at least a few of them without even knowing. With the coming of Christ, these spirits were driven into the shadows. They lost their faces and their names, but it turns out in the shadows they were able to gain even more influence than they had before. Now they rule our world, but they do so unnamed. In this video, I'll attempt to rename them and give their faces back so that you can see exactly what it is that modern man actually worships. Pagan gods are just spirits of old. They were only partly understood, and thus they were clothed in personalities and images which represented them, but were not really them. After all, a spirit isn't a physical thing, and thus you can't really paint an image of one, just images and symbols which represent them. Which is exactly why they're able to move through the lives of people unobserved. To show exactly what forms of worship I'm talking about, I'll use the Greek gods as an example. Any pagan pantheon would work, but the Greek gods are the most well-known and well-recorded, so I'll limit it to them. Let's break down each of these entities and explore exactly what they and their worshippers are doing right now in our modern age. By the end, I hope you'll see that these spirits are very much still around and being worshipped. Perhaps the easiest spirit to understand, given that he hasn't changed all that much over the centuries, is Zeus, the king of the gods. He is authority and power. He is law and order. He is justice. He's said to be the center of human affairs and the protector of cities, homes, and strangers. He is the mediator of disputes between the other gods, and that's exactly the same description of any government. Zeus came to power when he overthrew his father, Kronos. Kronos had been warned that one of his children would overthrow him, so to prevent that, he swallowed each of his children at birth. But Zeus was protected by his mother, Rhea, who tricked Kronos into devouring a swaddled stone and snuck Zeus to safety. Once grown, Zeus took the goddess of good counsel, Metis, as his wife, and with her help, he challenged his father. At first, Metis tricked Kronos into swallowing a poisoned drink, which made him throw up Zeus's siblings, and then Zeus directly confronted Kronos with the help of his freed siblings, as well as the help of two allies, the Cyclops, which means one-eyed, and the Hecatoncheires, which means 100-handed. This is how all nations emerge, by overthrowing their former rulers and creating something new. America was no exception, as it cast off the rule of the British and founded a new nation. For the creation of this new government body, so too were two distinct allies needed. The Cyclops were giants with a single eye. This represents great men who see differently, men of vision who share a single unified dream of the future, and there were 56 Cyclopses present at the signing of the Declaration of Independence, all signing their names in that unified vision of a new nation. And each name is known to this day. The Founding Fathers were giants of American history, so all had one eye towards their goal of America. They were the first lawmakers who shared the unified sight that was the law itself, that which reveals into the light and that which strikes down the unlawful. Also joined in the effort was the common man, the Revolutionary Army itself, consisting of the masses of fighting men, each with two hands, but together their hands numbered in the hundreds. These were the Hecatoncheires, the 100 hands. Though they did not share the vision of the Cyclops, they were the hands that did the hard work on the ground. The names of each individual soldiers have been lost to time, but their collective deeds, and thus the collective effort of their hands, are still remembered. This is why it is said that the Hecatoncheires threw boulders at the Titans, but the Cyclops forged lightning bolts for Zeus to cast. And indeed, that is what law is, a sudden strike of clarifying lightning that reveals how things are. That's what government does does and what lawmakers enable the government to do. It creates the clarifying law and judgment in places where there is darkness and confusion. That is the power the government has. If it's unclear who's in the right, the government will bring in the light of law and clarify exactly who's in the legal right, and so it judges from the highest place, the ruler of all. And when that law comes down, it strikes the lawbreaker from above. Thus, justice is carried out. In this way, the writing of the Declaration of Independence was the first lightning bolt the new nation of America cast at the old Titan of England. Then the Cyclopses forged many more clarifying laws as they used their singular vision to found a nation. But just like his father before him, Zeus was warned that his next son with Metis would overthrow him, and so he swallowed his first wife whole to prevent it. Similarly, as soon as the rule of England was cast off, the new nation of America quickly wrote the Constitution of the United States, a document that would bind future generations under the law and prevent them from overthrowing it, just as it had overthrown Kronos before. Thus America swallowed the future generations and prevented them from becoming a never-ending cycle of revolutions. And from that stability, we find the nation of America as it is today, the government fulfilling exactly the role of Zeus. Zeus's most notorious attribute is his promiscuity, seducing and often forcing himself upon various women to produce offspring of many varieties. And this is the way our modern government acts as well. It goes around inserting itself into various places, trying to manifest its will, funding projects which sometimes bear fruit and other times are just a waste of taxpayer money. These projects may be a seduction of the people, such as in the enticing offering of Social Security, which sounded like such a great safety net for the elderly, but other times forcing its will on people, such as when the government invokes eminent domain and forces citizens to sell their property to the government so it can use the land for a new highway or other public building project. America is speckled with these projects: social safety nets, health care, education, transportation, research projects, national defense, and more. And though it spins, none can stop it, for it is the highest authority in the land. Any who trespass against it receive a lightning bolt of justice. And that's not to say that the justice of the government is always right. The same can be said for Zeus. Though he carries out justice often, he's never consistent and often shows favoritism and flawed judgment. The same can certainly be said about the government. So powerful is the image of the ruler of all that even in modern times it has manifested, not as Zeus, but rather as Uncle Sam, a personification of the U.S. government, an undeniable uniting spirit among Americans, and a reincarnation of Zeus himself, or rather a remasking of the same spirit. And people certainly worship the government. Vast amounts of time and energy are sacrificed trying to get the favor and some level of control of the government. The highest authority is contested by all the lesser groups, and thus all the other gods compete for the favor, or sometimes rebel against, the most high entity. Chief among the critics of Zeus is his wife, Hera, queen of the gods and goddess of marriage, women, family, and childbirth. Her defining attribute is that of jealousy and wrath at the illegitimate offspring of Zeus. From this we can see that it is the wont of her modern worshippers to be jealous of that which men produce, and thus to judge and punish it. And that is what we see in modern feminism, and it is feminists who worship the spirit once called Hera in our modern age. The attempt to become equal is one and the same as jealousy of that which someone else has, but you do not. Zeus goes around fornicating with other women, both goddesses and mortals alike, producing other offspring. So too do men fornicate with other parts of the world, which leaves women as a whole out. The largest of these creative structures being the government, thus Zeus himself. Because of this, women will hate that which takes the creative energy of the masculine away from her, which feels as though he is cheating on her by creating things with another source of potentiality. On the individual scale, this can be seen as mundane as a girlfriend annoyed that her boyfriend is paying more attention to his video games than to her. But on the macro scale, it becomes a spirit of its own and a force of disruption on the systemic level. Feminists will constantly attack and criticize things which do not serve their goals within the larger government body as a whole, demanding that the government resources be used to create programs for gender equality, equal pay, equal opportunities, reproductive rights, and protection from discrimination, which often spills into the demands for certain offspring of the nation to receive more attention, such as racial justice, justice based on class, or justice for other marginalized groups. This is how Hera treats the illegitimate offspring of Zeus, putting them through 12 trials in the case of Heracles, punishing Arcas and his mother by transforming them into bears, and trying to prevent Leto from giving birth at all. By trying to destroy these offspring that she wasn't part of, she is testing them and demanding that they prove their worth. By doing so, she is the tempering force which often drives those offspring of Zeus into becoming heroes and great men. This is exactly what feminists do. They demand the government resources be dedicated to the creative projects they want, and anything which does not serve their agenda they try to destroy. But that which remains and proves itself untouchable becomes stronger than ever before. Modern examples include the pay gap, which was investigated and found to not be discrimination, but rather caused by the choices of women themselves, or the Me Too movement, where too many false allegations were levied against men, which ultimately caused the courts to be more on guard against lying women, and men to defensively distance themselves from women, often after seeing the false allegations that ruined previous men's lives. Just like Hera, these attacks against sometimes justified systems causes people to think feminism is nothing but bitter women lashing out emotionally, which undermines any legitimate qualm they may have had with actual unfairness, and often ends up doing the opposite of what they intended. In the case of individuals, this is often called the Streisand effect, which is when something that is attempted to be suppressed becomes only more popular because of the censorship and suppression. Examples of quote-unquote heroes who popped out into popularity from this attack upon them are names like Jordan Peterson, Andrew Tate, and even Ken from the Barbie movie. In this way, feminists are the modern worshippers of Hera and serve as the judge and adversary of all the government creates, wishing to instead bend the authority of the government to the things which she has a hand in creating. When Zeus overthrew the Titans, he drew lots with his brothers, Poseidon and Hades, for who would get to rule where. Zeus got the sky, Poseidon got the oceans, and Hades ruled the underworld. Poseidon is the god of the sea, earthquakes, horses, and storms. He is the counterpart to Zeus, who rules from below. Lesser than Zeus in power, but more free and wild. His conquests of women rival that of Zeus, for he is of the same nature, but being weaker, his realm is that which must be expressed in places outside of the control of the seat of power. That is the meaning of the oceans, which are places a kingdom cannot govern, and where ships leave the safety of harbors and risk traveling through, but cannot stay for long. Horses are the same, able to live free only in open pasture between city walls. Great effort must be taken to break and bridle them, so they may be used within a society. Because of this, the modern worshippers of Poseidon are those who rule in the fringe places. In such places, little kingdoms appear, unable to challenge the highest authority of government, but not for lack of desire. These are the street gangs, the biker gangs, the drug runners, the street racers, the graffiti artists, the doomsday preppers, the off-grid homesteaders, the hippies, the van lifers, the hackers, the dark web and black markets, the vigilante groups, the local militias, the rooftop Koreans, the radical thinkers, the censorship-defying authors, the neo-pagans, the cults, and the teens who skateboard in malls. All of these difficult-to-police spaces are the domain of Poseidon. Just as ancient ships risked themselves sailing through open, stormy waters, so too do you take a risk driving through a bad part of town. These are places where authority is attempted but cannot build up because the ever-changing waters of chaos in such places. The people who live there are ill-tempered, prideful, jealous, and always unsatisfied. Their pride and compulsive actions contrast by the inherent humility that they cannot take real power for themselves and will always be a secondary power. But but in their highest moments they can still shake a town or city, creating earthquakes in localized areas which get the attention of all. They run free like wild horses, and they pass through like storms, causing trouble and damage and establishing a little petty kingdom that doesn't last and are never able to consolidate for long in any single place, rising and falling like the waves of the sea. Those who worship him worship freedom above all else. In older times, Poseidon was the spirit of pirates, American frontiersmen, cowboys, and bohemians. These are the groups that society at large would really rather suppress, but the cost of doing so makes it impossible, and so they must be treated like a force of nature that will invariably come and go on its own. Like Zeus's lightning bolt, the Cyclops made the trident for Poseidon. Unlike the single point that Zeus has, which is like a spear made for killing, the 3 points of Poseidon's trident represent a fishing tool, 3 prongs to allow for the catching of fish, fishing being the hard-to-hold onto bounty of the sea. If you spear a fish but it slips off the spear, then it's still gone. But on land, spearing an animal just makes it fall over for easy collection. In this way, the 3-pronged trident is an attempt to gain control of what you don't have, whereas the single-pointed spear implies the use of control already obtained. At the founding of America, it was wise for the founding fathers to split the government into 3, the legislative, executive, and judicial branches. This splitting limits the power of the government and increases the control and stability of it. Their attempt to try and add a bit more Poseidon and a bit less Zeus into the government. After all, America is the land of the free. This is why many times in Greek mythology, Poseidon tries to overthrow Zeus, perpetually jealous of his brother's power, but never quite strong enough to take it. Hades is the god of death, the underworld, and hidden wealth from below. You might think it strange that people would worship death, and yet the worship of Hades is rampant in our modern age. The Cyclops forged Hades, the helm of shadows, which rendered the wearer invisible. This turning invisible was key to his worship, because anything that ends up in the underworld is no longer seen by the living. Thus it is invisible. This forms his dual nature, one of death and disappearing, and the other of riches and wealth. Those who worship him have something they want to disappear into death, and from that sacrifice will come greater wealth. Among those who worship him in modern times are women who have abortions, the antinatalists, and the death cults. If you've ever heard someone say, "I wish the housing market could crash so I can finally afford a house," then you have witnessed a prayer to Hades, a wish that what now is will die and be replaced by something which will benefit the living who remain. Abortion is the same. By making the unborn disappear, it leaves the woman free to continue her life unburdened by such things. Those who wish for their society to collapse do so in hopes that they can gain a feast from the ruins and rebuild from death, making themselves carrion birds who pray that death takes for their gain. Antinatalists will often claim there are too many people on this planet. We need a natural disaster. And that is a wish that death would remove some competition so that they could stay and prosper. But never do they offer themselves as a sacrifice to death. This cycle can be seen in Hades' primary story, in which he desires a wife, and so kidnaps Persephone, the goddess of spring. Without her, Demeter, the goddess of the harvest and her mother, falls into despair and no crops grow, causing starvation among mankind. To remedy the situation, Zeus negotiates that Persephone will stay in the underworld with Hades for half the year and return for the other half. This is why there is a season of spring growth and a season of wintry death. Often you hear the claim that boomers stole their children's future by spending too much on themselves and leaving the debt for the next generation. That complaint is one and the same as they sacrificed their children to Hades. They kept Persephone too long to preserve their own spring, and now there will be an equally long winter which their children will not survive. The proper cycle of life and death has been disrupted. They should have died so that we could live. Demeter is the goddess of agriculture, grain, and fertility. She is a mother figure, caring and compassionate, but in her compassion she always goes too far. When her daughter Persephone was abducted by Hades, she cared so much for her lost daughter that she stopped tending to the harvest and caused mass starvation for human populations. When she disguised herself as a mortal woman and was tasked by a king to be the wet nurse for his newborn son, Demophoon, she went even farther and tried to gift the child with immortality by placing him in the fireplace each night to burn away his mortal flesh and replace it with a mortal skin instead. But when the mother noticed the boy's rapid growth and size, she investigated and saw the boy in the fire, causing her to scream in alarm. Demeter then removed the boy from the fire, leaving him mortal, and left. This compassion, which goes too far and overindulges those who are beloved, is a commonly worshipped spirit in modern day. It is the worship of food. Throughout human history, this has been seen as nothing but good and necessary, because how can you have too much food in storage? But in modern times, it has gone much too far. The mastery of the cycle of the growing season has had a curse of too much abundance. Those who worship Demeter overindulge, becoming terribly obese and unhealthy. In an attempt to produce ever more food, food has been altered. Genetic modification to crops and substances rendered from foodstuffs into seed oils and artificial sweeteners the human body was never designed to ingest have begun to poison the mind and the body. The industries which once brought food to our local supermarkets now alter the food to maximize not the nutrition but the flavor and pleasure of the food, aiming to make it as addictive as possible, causing the modern worshiper of Demeter to literally eat themselves to death, which mirrors the story of Erysichthon, a king who cut down Demeter's sacred grove to make way for a feast he was planning, and was cursed by Demeter with eternal hunger for his trespass. He gave away all of his riches and even sold his own daughter in order to buy ever more food, until finally he died when his hunger became so great he began to eat himself. In the same way, the food production industry is merely fulfilling the desires of people as best it can, allowing those who worship their stomach to indulge themselves to death. Apollo is the god of the sun, prophecy and oracles, music and song, archery, healing, plague and disease, and the protection of the young. He was born alongside his twin sister, Artemis. Upon his birth, the first thing he did was to slay the chaos serpent Python, and in doing so freed the oracle shrine at Delphi. We see this same spirit at work in the modern day in the form of science. The advent of the scientific method pushes out the confusion and chaos of the unknown. Apollo's arrows are said to be shafts of pure light, which reveal truth, and his association with oracles and their future-predicting prophecies are the same as the predictive power of the patterns that science unveils through theories and data-driven models which have proven to have great predictive power. Python also represents disease, and medical science has made leaps and bounds in the curing of countless illnesses. And Apollo governs song and poetry, because science is the root of the creation of most instruments. Each instrument created through the repeated experiments of making a sound-creating object, testing it, and tweaking it to get just the right sound, leading to some of the earliest investigations of different types of materials and their usefulness in producing various sounds for the sake of creating music, a method that required systematic observations of the world, which would go on to form all of the scientific method. Even today, the various tools used in laboratories are called scientific instruments. But the same revealing truth through the light of Apollo's arrows is equally a force of destruction, and thus poison or plague. The same light that reveals truth destroys darkness and the ability to hide, and so Apollo's main attribute is that of the sun, the all-consuming light which banished darkness but leaves no room in the sky for anything else. No stars and rarely the moon are permitted to exist alongside that blinding light, and that is what some modern people have come to worship.
not science itself, but rather scientism, which is the excessive belief in the power of science. It's the act of taking the facts of science and trying to make them say more than they actually do, not just using science as an informative tool, but as a guiding force. Apollo is the son of Zeus, and indeed the government has funded much of science over the years, though Hera is not his mother, and she attempted to prevent his birth by sending the serpent Python to hunt him. Even today, feminism is often at odds with science when science reveals biological differences between men and women, which do not help women to close the gap of equality with men on the physical front, and whose existence is sometimes outright denied. Scientism is most prominently seen in the story of when Apollo kills the Cyclops because they forged the lightning bolts that Zeus used to kill Apollo's son, Asclepius. Due to Asclepius, a mortal, becoming too powerful with his healing abilities, so refined that he could even raise the dead, and thus he threatened the power of the gods themselves. We see this happening once again as people try to undermine the Cyclops of our day, who are the lawmakers, by demanding that they follow the science. The trust that modern people have in science and scientists is higher than ever, and many have called for politicians to be replaced fully by scientists. This overreach of scientism expresses in various views. Some now claim that science is the only valid way to gain truth, and in doing so blind themselves into a form of pathological reductionism of complex aspects of human life, leading to logically sound but morally reprehensible conclusions such as eugenics, technological arms races, and the spread of life-destroying fatalism. Some people make claims about what science will soon do as though it is certain, their worldview turning into a sort of trust of a science fiction future, causing them to make choices in their lives right now based on things which haven't actually come to pass yet, placing too much trust in the future predictions of scientific oracles, as well as the veneration of well-known scientists who can speak deeply about material facts, but whose moral core is questionable at best. And with the intertwining of policy making with these cults of personality, it opens science up to the power game of lobbying, in which facts of science begin to come from the agenda of who's funding the research rather than the research itself. I see it in philosophical spaces all the time, people who will confidently claim science has proven there is no God, and yet when asked for what study they're talking about, they can produce none because they have taken good science and extrapolated more than it actually claims, convincing themselves that science supports something which was really just their own preferred set of facts about reality around them. In this way, the worshippers of Apollo today are those who blindly trust the light of science in all ways, even the ones they've made up. Artemis, the goddess of hunting, the wilderness, and wild animals, the twin sister of Apollo, she protects nature and animals. In her story, the handsome giant Orion boasted that he could hunt all animals to extinction. For this boast, Apollo tricked Artemis into killing him when he said that Artemis couldn't hit a tiny speck out in the ocean with her bow. She took the challenge and let fly her arrow, hitting her target perfectly. But it turned out that the target was Orion, who was swimming out in the ocean. Feeling remorse, Artemis petitioned Zeus to place Orion up in the stars, where he resides to this day as the Orion constellation. The modern incarnation of the spirit of Artemis is environmentalism. Orion claimed to be able to hunt every animal to extinction, and today we have industries who threaten to industrialize the whole world and turn all resources into commodities for consumption, replacing natural habitats and biomes. People certainly find the products that industries make attractive, just like Orion was attractive, but it is the predictions of Apollo, and thus science, that warns about the dangers of future climate change, pollution, deforestation, and animal species being driven to extinction. These apocalyptic warnings have driven many into movements like environmentalism, veganism, animal rights, and sustainability, movements which, at the warnings of science, seek to limit what the giants of industry can do. Like Apollo, Zeus is Artemis's father, and most of these movements involve trying to get legislation in place that regulates and restricts industry, the most prominent being the sacred forests of Artemis that have been made into law in the form of national parks scattered throughout America, truly beloved by her modern worshippers. But those restrictions lead to regret, as many industries were successfully reduced, a perceived victory at first, but as lower production drove prices higher and jobs in those industries moved overseas, the abundance provided by Orion is increasingly missed. And now, among the goals people look up to are bring back the jobs and make food affordable again. These are seen in the stars above, which guide how modern people vote. We can see here a modern conflict between Artemis and Demeter. Demeter wanting more land to cultivate crops and feed the appetites of swelling populations' demands, but Artemis trying to preserve what ecosystems remain from the overflow of pesticides and the clearing of forests to make way for farmland. And we can see a sort of alliance between the followers of Artemis and Hades in the anti-natalist sentiment. There are too many people in this world. We need to reduce the population in order to save the planet. And there's danger in me telling you this, because the story of Actaeon, a hunter who spied upon Artemis as she bathed, and for his trespass she turned him into a stag, and he was torn apart by his own hunting hounds. I have revealed the nakedness of this goddess by outlining the failures of these movements, and already in the comments I can hear the dogs typing out their criticisms, trying to tear apart my arguments, and how climate change must be addressed or we will all perish. Hermes is the god of commerce, travel, thieves, messengers, roads, and shepherds. His role is that of the messenger of the gods. His first act upon being born was to crawl off and steal the cattle of Apollo. From the cattle he made sinew strings and pulled them over the shell of a turtle, creating the first lyre, an instrument. When Apollo used his gift of seeing the future to come and get his cattle back, Hermes offered the lyre in exchange for the cattle, which pleased Apollo. Hermes then crafted a pipe flute, and Apollo wanted it as well, offering his golden shepherd's staff for it. But Hermes negotiated not only for the staff, but to be taught how to do prophecy as well, which Apollo agreed. From this we can see his spirit in the modern age. Hermes takes from the raw knowledge of science, sometimes without asking, and produces something even more useful from it, taking Apollo's cattle and making a lyre. He negotiates with Apollo and gains the power to tell the future. From this we can see that Hermes is the free market. The name of the game in the market is price discovery, the attempt to figure out where value is so it can be made and sold in the future. That's what makes him the messenger of the gods. The gods know how the world really is, and in order to get the message to humans, it must be revealed to them. Did anyone know that people wanted cell phones? Well, first, science had to make them, and then the market had to discover the use and demand for them among the people. Then the people had to be advertised to let them know they wanted that product. Every advertisement you see is a little message from Hermes. Every shopping mall, a temple. It's an attempt to reveal to you what is available and why you want it. Hermes is the market. Hermes is commerce and price discovery, and his worship is rampant. Wall Street is dedicated to him, where he uses all the data Apollo can muster for his own prophetic predictions of if the stock market is going up or down tomorrow. Times Square is covered in his messages. Consumerism is in full swing, and it's worshipped in every household. Billions of dollars are spent in worship of simply learning what it is you want and getting it. A never-ending love-hate relationship with the middleman who's only there to connect you with what you want. In our age, he's among the most prominent gods. He deals with Demeter to sell you new food. He sells motorcycles to the worshippers of Poseidon. He barters picket signs to the followers of Hera so they can protest what Zeus just did. He even cuts down trees to grow cotton to make the shirts that say "Save a Tree" and sells them to the worshippers of Artemis. He'll fly an American flag, a gay pride flag, or a Nazi flag out front. It doesn't matter to him so long as it makes you buy.
His trick is to profit off everything and anything that happens. He is considered one of the most friendly gods to humans, and for good reason. He has something to offer everyone, but is also the patron of thieves, and there is a very fine line between shrewd business and downright highway robbery. He's the overseer of sports and games, and modern sports brings untold profits to his followers nationwide. He's a god of music, not inspiring it, but rather facilitating it, meaning that behind every rock star and international tour, there has been a follower of Hermes making it all happen. He's the mediator between individuals, and his worshippers will do anything to facilitate that exchange. If the government wants taxes, then Hermes collects taxes and brings them to Zeus. When Ares goes to war, Hermes tells the factories to start making bombs and tanks, and then he'll turn right around and deliver messages for the peace talks. If you want a YouTube video about how the Greek gods are still alive, then someone is sure to make one. And most grimly, he brings messages from Hades. When you look in the mirror and you see the wrinkles on your face getting deeper, when your skin sags and your hair turns gray, that's him bringing a message from Hades below that one day you will die. And then adds there's a sale on the new wrinkle cream. Buy one, get one free. Offer limited time only while supplies last. See website for details. Aphrodite is the goddess of love, beauty, and desire. Born out of sea foam and often depicted naked, Aphrodite's stories are a repeated parade of her eagerness to lay with gods and mortals alike. Her modern influence is obvious. The worshippers of desire are rampant. For her male followers, there is pornography, OnlyFans, AI girlfriends, and all manner of monetized eroticism that pervades our society. The most poignant story being that of Pygmalion, a sculptor who created a statue of a female and fell in love with the fake woman. He prayed to Aphrodite and she made this statue come to life for him. Similarly, countless lonely men eagerly waste away their time and money watching pixels on a screen come to life to mimic a real woman. Aphrodite's treatment of women isn't better. She often creates competition or forces forbidden and dysfunctional forms of love, such as when she made Smyrna fall in love with her own father. While her male followers might pine for the trick of artificial female forms on screens, her female followers are tricked with a simple lie. At first, they feel empowered from the money and attention they gain, but soon realize that they have sold themselves. They begin to hate that men see them only for their beauty, and the power they once had becomes a curse. As they grow older, their beauty fades, and they find they have nothing left to sell. They become irrelevant and fade into sea foam. This is why we also see a rivalry and constant mocking from Hera. Modern feminists go back and forth on the topic of the sex industry, sometimes claiming that it's empowering for women, but later calling it exploitative and evil. So too do we see that Hera is jealous of Aphrodite and wants to be as beautiful as she, but at the same time mocks Aphrodite for her foolish nature and short-term thinking. Aphrodite was first married to Hephaestus, another Olympian god, and as we get to him we'll see why, but she quickly cheated on him, favoring Ares, the god of war. It can certainly be seen that one of the things which motivates modern men to join the army is a girl worth fighting for, and women have always been attracted to men in uniform. Ares is the god of war and conflict. His spirit is simple. Where there is struggle, he is there to bring peace. How? By sorting out the conflict to its final conclusion and allowing for peace to occur because there's no one left to fight. In our modern times, he is alive and well. You see him in the courtroom where lawyers fight legal battles. You see him in the sports arena working with Hermes as two teams compete to see who wins. You see him on a stage during political debates between candidates, and of course, you see him in the military, always prepared for war. His modern worshippers are those who simply want to use violence to solve problems. You'll see them constantly warning that we need more defense. Their priorities are outside threats like terrorism, Russia, China, drug trafficking, and cyber attacks. Their fixation on being ready for conflict makes them seem at the same time brutish and secretly cowardly. Even so, there's something alluring about the military as far as women are concerned, and indeed Ares and Aphrodite were lovers, and when Hephaestus, Aphrodite's husband, found out, she made a golden net and captured them in the act, displaying them for other gods to laugh at.
The saying, son of a gun, portrays the same thing, where we see soldiers often going overseas for war, and then suddenly there's a wave of illegitimate children who look like them popping up in those places, a fact often mocked. Ares is also defeated and captured by a pair of giants who bind him in chains and cage him in a bronze jar. But despite this, none of the gods came to save him, even Zeus, his father. Only Hermes comes to his rescue and steals him away to freedom again. This is often the case we see in two nations who are at peace. Thus war is held prisoner by that peaceful time. Not even their governments wish to spark a conflict because everything is going smoothly. But inevitably, it is the market that rescues war when some new resource is discovered. Badly needed oil, iron, or simply farmland can be enough to cause one nation to turn its eye onto the lands of another, and thus the need for more consumerism is that which revives war again. In this way, Ares is the industrial military complex, a self-feeding institution that makes war for profit and profits from making war, a self-perpetuating cycle in modern America, in which fear of outside threats prevent people from speaking up against those who, with unquestioned power, use that power to continue infinite conflicts, generating their own money from conflict because peace is bad for business. Dionysus, the god of wine, festivity, theater, and madness, born from Zeus and a human mother named Semele. Zeus promised Semele anything she asked of him, but Hera was jealous, so she tricked Semele into asking Zeus to show his full divine form to her. Bound by his promise, Zeus did so, and Semele was instantly incinerated by a bolt of lightning that erupted from Zeus. But in her womb survived the unborn Dionysus, who Zeus snatched up from the smoldering remains of Semele. To save him, Zeus cut open his own thigh and placed the baby inside, sewing it back up until Dionysus was ready to be born. This is why Dionysus is called the twice-born, birthed by his father rather than his mother. Thus, he is both a partial human while also being fully divine, a contradiction incarnate. He was given to Hermes to be raised, but to protect him from Hera, he was raised as a girl. Soon, Dionysus created wine, which was used to fog the minds of people and put them into a drunken state. Symbolic of dangerous allure, his symbols are the thyrsus, a staff with a pine cone on top, which releases its seeds but only when caused by a forest fire, and because it resembles a club used for violence. He's also symbolized by leopards, which are beautifully spotted but deadly predators, and wine, tasty and freeing of the spirit to socialize, but too much leads to drunkenness. His dual natures include half-human and fully divine, masculine and feminine, revelry and madness, and acceptance and wrathfulness. From this we can see that his spirit has become widely worshipped in the social justice movements of our time. His mother was tricked by feminism into destroying herself by focusing too much on the seat of government power, and was destroyed by the very demands for law she made. But Dionysus was saved by the government, who raised him as best it could, albeit in an unnatural way. This shows a parallel to modern times in which the same laws that encourage and protect women to build careers and receive welfare and assistance programs have left their children raised not by these working mothers, but by daycare and government-funded preschools instead. And rather than having a husband, many women find themselves dependent on the state, leaving them burning with loneliness and surviving, but not really living. Dionysus had to take on a dual nature to protect himself from feminism, dressing like a woman and becoming comfortable living in a dual state. That dual state then allowed for indulgences in pleasures forbidden to those who are stuck on one side of the binary. A troubled upbringing leaves little to lose, and so limits are few. Without the structure and limitations imposed by a father figure, many modern youths have been left to consider that there is no danger at all to living in pursuit of pleasure above all else, and in this way they become drunk on the wine of Dionysus.
Dionysus is normally accepting of all pleasures, but to those who speak against his message of pleasure, he suddenly becomes wrathful and curses them with insanity or transformation. Anyone who has ever spoken to a social justice-style leftist knows exactly what this is like. They will preach acceptance, but turn into firebrands against anyone who rejects that acceptance. King Pentheus of Thebes doubted Dionysus's godhood and declared his worship forbidden, but was driven mad and was killed by his own mother and aunts, who were driven into a crazed frenzy by a spell of Dionysus. This shows that any who criticize the ecstasy of alternative lifestyles will have women, sometimes even family members, attack them for it. This is a Dionysian ritual called sparagmos. It means to rip and tear, and constitutes a tearing apart of someone or something for the sake of protecting the pleasure of the group. We see the worshippers of Dionysus performing this ritual constantly in our modern times. The slogan, "Eat the rich," demands that the rich be sacrificed, their wealth torn apart and distributed to everyone else. Riots and violent protests are the same, in which people band together and tear apart shops, stores, and homes of those around them, looting and distributing the wealth inside among themselves to preserve their own pleasure. Monopoly busting is another example in which a corporation is considered to have too much of a grasp on a single market, and so it is torn apart and split into smaller entities in order to keep prices low for everyone else. The movements to tear apart and break down traditional gender roles, sexual taboos, and forbidden lifestyles are all iterations of the same ritual being carried out, as is the social media phenomenon of doxing, in which the group tries to hunt down the identity of an individual and tear apart their life as a way to silence them and preserve what they were criticizing. And now it seems that even entire nations are being split apart and divided among those who cross the border. This is why Dionysus replaces Hestia, the goddess of home and hearth, as time goes on through Greek history. Because once the cult of Dionysus takes over a nation, there's no way to preserve that which once made it home. In modern terms, Dionysus is currently putting Hestia through sparagmos. Sparagmos of the Dionysian worshippers is among the most prevalent spirits worshipped today. It is an indulgence in the urges that drive people to the ecstasy and madness that comes from breaking social norms and indulging in all manner of the taboo, seeking to perpetuate their pleasure by any means necessary. If you've ever noticed that many modern billionaires dress poor and common, it's because they are trying to avoid sparagmos. The main idea of Dionysus is tear it all apart and use the pieces for something new, which mirrors the social justice idea that societal norms must be torn down in order for them to build something better and more inclusive. The very idea of trying to do so, making them fervent and drunk with passion for it, denying themselves no indulgence, but becoming intensely wrathful to anyone who says they should stop. The worshippers of Dionysus can now be found at all levels of society. Athena is the goddess of wisdom and warfare. She was born after Zeus consumed his first wife, Metis, while she was still pregnant with Athena, and from Zeus's forehead sprang Athena, fully armed and armored. Shortly after her birth, Athena challenged Poseidon for the rulership over the city of Athens. The contest was who could produce the best gift to the people of Athens. Poseidon produced the first horse, symbolizing an offering of freedom, but Athena produced an olive tree, which symbolized peace, and the people chose her. The people gave up their freedom of thought and submitted to the collectivizing of knowledge into a centralized body and authority who would be the deciding force of what was true in the world, which would unify the city and bring it peace. So Athens became the city of Athena, and there was founded there the first institution of higher education in all of history, Plato's Academy. With Zeus as the government in modern times, we see that Athena was the necessary emergence of the institutions of wisdom and knowledge. Even in modern times, Athena is the spirit of academia itself. Her spirit has become pervasive. All modern children now attend school and continue to do so for nearly a third of their entire lives. This means that everyone is trained to think in the same way and know the same facts. The mitochondria is the powerhouse of the cell.
And this has its advantages. With a formal structure of knowledge, a great abundance of worldly understanding could be built up, not the least of which is military academies which train wise men to go into battle. But like all these spirits, her worship has become dysfunctional. The modern worshippers of Athena say source for any and all claims, refusing to accept anything that didn't come from an academy somewhere, even though they can't or won't do anything to check on the validity of that published paper themselves. They just want the stamp of approval that it came from the place they blindly trust. That which once promoted wisdom now inverts, coaxing people not to think for themselves and become wise, but rather to suppress their own thoughts and substitute them with the thoughts of those who have degrees and authority to know, allowing themselves to become programmed and trained. That is the freedom that giving over your thinking to academia entails, and that's what happened to Poseidon when he was rejected. Schools train you to think in compartmentalized concepts. These are boxes, labels which contain a structure which is crystallized categorizations of reality. The moment you create this box, you cut off all other understandings about something and become a gatekeeper to any variation. You can see this anytime someone says, "Oh, you're an X." It doesn't matter what X is, a political party, a philosophical school, a religion, a race, or a sex. The moment a person calls you an X, you've been put into a box and their mind has closed. Now they say, "I know all about X's, and because you are one, I know all about you." This lets them save time by ending the effort it takes for them to listen and observe you firsthand. Instead, they default to what they have been taught about the box labeled X. If they were mistaken in their categorizing of you, then they have cut off anything new they would have learned had they not been so trusting of the boxes they were given. By relying on their boxes, they have blinded themselves to anything which does not fit into any of their well-trained boxes. Me saying this repeats the story of Tarsius, who peeked on Athena while she was bathing, and for his trespass he was struck blind. But in turn, his mother cleaned his ears, and he gained the ability to understand every note of birds, see the future, and walk normally as though he had sight. A hint that those who let go of academia and see it for the blindness it really is, will actually be able to see more, not less. Athena is also called Parthenos, which means virgin, and suggests she is kept pure of other influence, but in our modern age she has lost her virginity. Athena once took the discoveries of Apollo and turned them into useful categorized wisdom, but now her followers have stopped caring about the truth behind the facts and have instead tried to mold the facts to their agendas. Athena has gotten into bed with Hermes, and now we see a publish or perish culture in which academics have to publish positive results regularly, often causing them to produce lower quality work and fudge results in order to ensure their future funding. We also see corporations funding studies which produce false findings to paint their products in a positive light and thus sell more of it. We observe the rise of low-quality publishing journals that only want to make a profit off of dramatizations of actual discoveries, and there are academics trying to make a career for themselves rather than trying to advance their discipline. All of these combined do damage to the reputation of academia, leading many to lose trust in it entirely. And worse, there is corruption of the alternative truth created by movements like Dionysus' social justice or Hera's feminism, which demand that any truth that goes against their agenda be censored and removed, compromising truth for the sake of pleasing what they worship. Other warnings from her stories can be found in the contest with the thread spinner Arachne over who could spin the finest fabric. Athena lost the competition, and in her rage turned Arachne into a spider, dooming her to spin thread for the rest of her life. Similarly, academia holds a curse for women. A spinster is a woman who is past the age of marriage and is now self-employed, originally as a thread spinner for the rest of her life, which was a profession in which women could be self-sustaining. At first, it was a symbol of female independence, but later turned into a label of shame as the women would be self-sufficient, but all alone. Modern women are still suffering from this as they find themselves with many academic degrees and a high income, but too old to start a family anymore. Spinsters for the rest of their lives. And this brings us to the last of the major Greek gods, More pervasive than Hermes and more insidious than Dionysus, this god has grown from a relatively minor god to one that is pervasive in all things, threatening even the rule of Zeus himself. Hephaestus, the blacksmith of the gods, a craftsman, metalworker, and master of fire. His tools were made as a remedy for his limited body. Hephaestus was born ugly and lame, said to be club-footed and weak, which was why his mother Hera abandoned him to die. But he did not die, and instead learned the power of craftsmanship, creating tools which made up for his weak body. Thus, each tool is an increase in bodily power because a tool simply extends the power a person already has. His story outlines how it is out of this weakness that creativity and innovation grow. And this is the story we see often in his modern worshippers, the common nerd, who finds himself born with unfortunate genetics and thus no other choice but to use his mind to invent and carve out a place for himself. This is the root of transhumanism. It requires the person to be dissatisfied with themselves in some way and wish to improve themselves using some crafted technology. And once he was able, Hephaestus got revenge by crafting a golden throne for Hera. But upon it were invisible shackles, and when she sat down, she became trapped there. How often do we hear the story of the nerd rejected by a woman in his youth, using his mind to become wealthy, and with that gold managing to get the same type of woman who didn't want him before? But our modern methods have far exceeded the humble blacksmith, and now Hephaestus has taken a new name, technology, the extension of human power and control in the world, making up for all of our weaknesses. Hephaestus created golden maidens who were automatons that carried out and aided in his work, no different than the robots engineers are working to create for the same purpose today. He forged Zeus's thunderbolts, Poseidon's trident, and Hermes' winged sandals, corresponding to technology facilitating the modern man's efforts. To the government of Zeus, technology has been gifted of surveillance devices, data-collecting machines, and vast communication networks, allowing it to bring down the light of judgment with ever more efficient strikes. To the fringe groups of Poseidon, technology has gifted them the iron horses, anonymous blockchains to transact with, and ever more stimulating drugs to free the mind. The market of Hermes has been given online stock trading, electronic transactions, and glowing advertisements delivered right to the eyes of the consumer. Modern interactions we've seen from Hephaestus include pleasing Hera by inventing the birth control pill, which allowed feminist women to become more equal to men with reproductive control. Dionysus has been given the internet, where his message of pleasure has spread like wildfire, and the same can be said for Aphrodite and her endless selfies. Hephaestus continues to delight Artemis with green technologies like solar, wind, and hydroelectric. Demeter has seen her methods of growing food expand her production many-fold with fertilization methods, pesticides, and genetically modified crops. Athena has been given all the information of the world's libraries fit into a man's pocket. Hardly anyone even thinks anymore without first Googling the answer. And Ares, gifted weapons powerful enough to end the world, grips nuclear bombs in each fist, daring anyone to challenge him now. The technology of Hephaestus's crafts have been integrated into every facet of human life and has now begun to change our bodies as well. Transhumanism is the latest cult to Hephaestus, which is the belief that humanity can evolve further through the usage and integration of technology with the human body. Examples of transhumanism include computer-brain interfaces like Neuralink, advanced prosthetics, gene therapy, cybernetic implants, artificial organs, cryonics, mind uploading, genetic engineering, and body-altering drugs, most of which are still in their infancy, but they're getting increasing attention with each passing day. We're going to see Hephaestus worship increase dramatically in the coming years as technology becomes better and better at fixing the flaws and weaknesses of mankind. We're already seeing the worshippers of Hephaestus preach far and wide about how technology is going to save us all. As Hephaestus's power grows, we see that it won't be long before he begins to challenge the other gods. It's common that his worshippers mock Hades, claiming that death itself will soon be cured. We see Aphrodite and Hera complaining about robot and AI companionship replacing traditional intimacy. We see Hermes lamenting that the stock market is now just a bunch of AI bots all trading with each other. Ares says that there's a real threat of the machines rising up and destroying their creators. And even Zeus is being challenged, as some transhumanists assert that once we have a sufficiently complex and powerful AI, it should be put in charge of running the entire government. As we look into the eyes of Apollo as he gazes into our future, what can he see but all of mankind bowing to Hephaestus on his high silicon throne as they cry out for him to bless them with another of his divine machines?
Hopefully you're starting to see that these spirits are anything but dead. They're rampant in our modern world and worshipped by countless people. So the question is, which of them do you sacrifice your time and attention to? We all sacrifice to something, even if we don't take the time to figure out exactly what that something is. But now that you're aware of these ancient spirits, don't you notice how fickle the gods can be? How shallow their depths, how fleeting their blessings, and how flawed their justice? Are these little g gods really worth your time and devotion? Or should you perhaps be giving your attention to a god that actually loves you back? But hey, thanks for joining me on my walk through Greek mythology and how it relates to today. Hopefully you learned what you actually worship and what those around you are spending their time dedicated to. If you think I got any of these wrong or you think you've got something to add, please leave it in the comments. I'd like to hear. And as always, God bless you.